Let's go. Dear friends, hello. This is a special podcast today. We do this in English. It is our first Legal Matters podcast in English, and I have the honor to have with me two very distinguished academics and friends. I believe the role of the academic community in Cyprus is crucial in a democracy and as regards the legal profession. And regrettably, in our country, we don't have the academic tradition, especially as far as the courts and the administration of justice is concerned. And it is something that started very recently with the help of people that come from other countries, like Professor Stephanie Shaelou, that I welcome. Hello, Stephanie, how are you?
Hi, Christophoros, I'm fine, thank you. Welcome, and to Klearchos as well.
And Dr. Klearchos Kyriakides. Hello, Klearchos, welcome. You are both working at the university, the UClan. Is it University of Lancaster? How is the correct?
University of Central Lancashire.
Central Lancashire. Okay, Stephanie, I have to disclose that we were students together many years ago. We're not saying any dates in Leicester, in the UK. So Professor Stephanie is the head of the law school of the university, and Klearchos is assistant head, right? And you are both professors, you are both lawyers. Klearchos comes from the UK, Cypriot, but with UK citizenship, and Stephanie, of course, she is from France, but married to a Cypriot, and she speaks Greek better than me. Okay, so I want, it's a very good opportunity actually to touch upon certain issues that we didn't have the chance to do in the last few days, as we were concentrated on more day-to-day things. And today we chose the topic of the EU and the UK approaches to the coronavirus. So we're going to examine the response of the EU and the UK, because the UK has very strong ties with Cyprus. The legal system is the same, and of course we have the British bases here and this long history. And also I want to discuss the new initiative of the university, a very interesting initiative about the rule of law initiative, as it is called. And I want you to tell me a little bit more about this and how we can take advantage of this process. So let me start, first of all, with getting your response and an initial reaction about the measures that were taken by the Cypriot government in the last few days or so. And I mean about the students' issue and the restriction of entry, the restriction of movement. Obviously, we have to do with human rights here. What is your response? What is your opinion? Did the government do this in the right way? Did they did anything wrong? So let's start with Stephanie to get her initial feedback on this.
Thank you, Christophoros. I think one of the things that we need to remind ourselves, and it takes its full dimension in this context, is that we are an island. And obviously, as an island, we have to react adequately and perhaps differently. So I am following what's happening in France very closely because I have my parents in Paris, for example. Klearchos is following very closely what's happening in the UK for the same reason. And we're able to compare the approaches and from the various governments. At the same time, because I'm an EU law expert, I also follow very closely the EU dimension. So you can't really just look at it from the Cypriot perspective and from the day-to-day perspective. I think there's a danger that if you look at it from the day-to-day perspective, you get lost in the details. So in such circumstances, it's probably best to go back to basics. The position of the island, the location of the island, and its features. So obviously, most of the COVID-19 cases were imported cases, as we know. So there was a need to take measures to restrict movements. Under EU law, this is acceptable provided proportionality is respected. So
yeah, but this is a key word, Stefan, isn't it? The word proportionality we have been discussing in the last few days. So were the measures proportional in your opinion?
So again, I don't have a full answer to this, but the way proportionality has been used or is being used in the EU, at the EU level and at the member states level, is a very different thing. And the case law of the Cypriot courts on proportionality are not always extremely helpful. So if I turn to the way proportionality is being interpreted at the EU level by the CJ primarily, it would seem that measures did look proportionate. Now, the problem we have is that we took measures that have heavy, serious consequences, social consequences, in the sense that we have divided families. So we have prevented families from reuniting for a very important duration and also for Easter. And we have also condemned a large part of the Cyprus economy, which is tourism.
Okay.
So whether
let me stop you there. Let me stop you there for a minute to get Klearchos also initial response, and then there are a couple of questions that I want to ask you. So Klearchos, what is your position?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me onto the program. I think the first thing I'd like to do, bearing in mind the colossal loss of life in my birthplace, the United Kingdom, is to express my condolences to all of the families there who've lost their lives. I'm sure there's a huge amount of suffering going on across the world, but in the United Kingdom in particular. So that's the first thing I wanted to do. In answer to your question, where I agree with Stephanie is that in a time of crisis, the first thing that a lawyer or a legal academic should do is to go back to first principles. Stephanie used the phrase basics. I'll use the phrase first principles, which amounts to the same thing.
Yeah.
The starting point is that for all of its history and troubles, the Republic of Cyprus has evolved into a democracy under the rule of law. And as a democracy under the rule of law, it is a democratic society, to use the phrase that's embodied in the European Convention on Human Rights. Because of the English colonial, British colonial past, Cyprus has also inherited the English common law tradition, which in many respects is actually the ancient Greek legal tradition. The starting point of English common law, I would suggest, is freedom under the law. And what Lord Denning described when he was sitting in the Court of Appeal and delivered the Hamlin Lectures in the University of Exeter as the heritage of freedom. So I would suggest that our starting point in the Republic of Cyprus for all of the troubles that we've had is the heritage of freedom. And what we have seen over the last few weeks is an unprecedented restriction on our individual freedom as citizens to go about our normal business, whether it's to fly overseas or to go to the shops. We have to seek permission from the state through the new computer and electronic system to leave our homes. Now, whether that is a justifiable or proportionate response to the pandemic is a matter for debate. I am inclined to the view, and I may be wrong, that the government of the Republic of Cyprus has acted justifiably and proportionately, because there is another fundamental principle at play here, and that is the fundamental right to life, coupled with the related fundamental right to human dignity, human dignity being the foundation of virtually every human right.
So your initial response is that we are within the boundaries, let's say.
We're coming very close to straying from the boundaries of justified into unjustified conduct. But what my gut reaction, and that's all it is at this moment, and this can only be resolved in the courts if it ever goes to court. My gut reaction is that the government of the Republic of Cyprus has acted responsibly by taking these measures. But what I do want to see is what we've started to call in the United Kingdom an exit strategy. What is going to be the exit strategy for us to come out of this?
Yeah, this is a huge issue, the exit strategy and going back to normal.
Yeah.
So Stephanie, you mentioned the EU law, and of course you are an expert on the EU law, and you also mentioned some Cypriot. The treatment by Cypriot courts of the restriction of human rights. So would you say that, generally speaking, I don't want you to go into the details, but the general idea, the general impression that you have is that there is a compatibility as regards the treatment of the measures between the EU law and Cypriot law? I mean, we didn't do anything extreme. Like, for example, this restriction to get out of your house after 9 o'clock in the evening till 6 a.m., is it within the EU boundaries, would you say?
I wouldn't go as far as this. Obviously, the European Union is not there to police everything member states do, and that has to do with the emergency situation. So each member state has within its own constitutional fabric mechanisms to deal with emergency. So ultimately, the courts will have to say whether proportionality was adequate or not, whether these are the national courts, whether these are the European courts, and that could very well be the Strasbourg court or the Luxembourg court. What I'm interested in looking at, however, is, and there is a lot of case law in Cyprus on this, is proportionality, or more generally, the principle of general public interest in times of crisis, in times of emergency situation. And this is a very interesting area, which unfortunately we have a lot of case law on in Cyprus, given the history of Cyprus, whether longer history or short-term history.
Yeah, Klearchos, watching what's going on in the UK, I see that there is a similar discussion going on between lawyers and academics about this human rights thing and how the measures have restricted human rights. So their perspective is interesting as well, because I mean, they have the Human Rights Act, and the basic principles are there, and they are the same, right?
Yes, our starting point in England is the common law, and which has now been reinforced as far as rights and freedoms are concerned by the Human Rights Act. There are expressions of concern put forth most notably by Lord Sumption, a retired Justice of the Supreme Court, on the 30th of March, if I recall correctly, because as he saw it, the police were acting on the orders of ministers, and those orders of ministers were not founded on law. It's one thing for the police to act in accordance with legal instructions issued in accordance with the law, and quite another thing for the police to act upon the preferences of ministers. The argument that Lord Sumption put forward was that we were exposed to the risk of turning into a police state. He actually used the phrase police state. He didn't say we had become one, but what we were seeing were the signs of a police state. The fundamental problem in the United Kingdom was that, firstly, that there was a delayed response to the epidemic, which later evolved into a pandemic, and that the government was slow to take action. They already had the legal framework for taking action. For example, one of the Margaret Thatcher era Acts of Parliament from 1984, from the AIDS epoch, if you remember the AIDS or the start of AIDS, there was a Disease Control Act from 1984 that the British government could have used. In addition, Tony Blair's government in 2004 adopted the Civil Contingencies Act. Neither of those acts of parliament were activated, insofar as I'm aware. The British government
that was a political choice, wasn't it?
Yes,
because the Prime Minister and the government thought that they would, I mean, the strategy they followed was somewhat different from other countries like ours or Greece and so on.
the different approach is symbolized by the dates of the relevant legal measures. The Coronavirus Act didn't receive the royal assent until the 25th of March 2020. The public health restrictions on citizens regulations didn't come into force until the 26th of March. The Welsh and Northern Irish regulations followed shortly thereafter, and incredibly enough, the Scottish equivalent of the Coronavirus Act, we have a separate Scottish Parliament now, the Scottish equivalent of the Coronavirus Act didn't receive the royal assent until the 6th of April. So what we had in the United Kingdom was firstly a delay implementing appropriate and effective legal measures. And secondly, there was not a coordinated approach across the United Kingdom because of the quasi-federalisation of the United Kingdom, primarily since the Devolution Acts of 1998. And there are lessons to be drawn there, Cyprus, because the political establishment in Nicosia, by and large, is wedded towards a settlement based on federalism. And both the British quasi-federalist model and the American federalist models have proven to be pretty ineffective in the that we've seen. But that's another matter for another day.
Another matter. Well, I mean, we may touch upon it discussing the EU management of the situation, because there we have, I don't know what system it's the EU. Stefan may tell us, is it a confederate system? Is it... I don't know. So
why do we have to characterize it that way? I mean, this is something that is of paramount importance in Cyprus, but perhaps also for academics, but much less for people.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, you're right. I mean, as lawyers and academics, we always like to put labels on people and on situations and on things. Anyway, Stephanie, I mean, going to the European Union handling of the situation, would you categorize for us, first of all, the response? I mean, can we put some blocks and categorize how the EU handled the matter?
Yes, so I will follow up on one of the words that Klearchos used, coordination. Which I think, if we can debate for hours whether the EU is a federal entity, at the very least, we can agree that there is coordinated action within the European Union. So what is interesting is this idea that if we compare it to the immediately previous crisis, which is the financial crisis, we have
2013. You mean
2013?
Okay.
Yes, we have a different setting. I mean, don't forget that the global financial crisis started in 2008, as early as 2008. It hit Cyprus in 2013, or at least it hit it overtly. But it's something that was actually on the international scene since 2008. So between 2008 and 2013, the European Union was taking active part on the global scene in measures. And this is something that only someone who has an interest in financial crisis research would have noticed. Now, with the pandemic, like COVID-19, obviously, the situation is a very different one because it's a public health disaster which has a global dimension. Unfortunately, we have not seen much happening at the global level, we have to say, despite all the efforts of the World Health Organization or other international organizations. So the European Union has a key role to play because in such a case of a pandemic, well, the very old rationale of the European Union, which is free movement, is affected, obviously. So compared to the financial crisis, I think we are starting with the assumption that the EU has a role to play. It has a role to play simply because the virus is traveling faster than anything else within the European Union, and obviously having a major impact on the internal market and ancillary policies of the European Union. I mean, let's not mention the EMU, the Economic and Monetary Union, but at least we could mention competition, state aid. So it's interesting that we have a coordinated approach there at the EU level, because basic policies of the European Union are affected at the same time. I would say that the lesson was drawn, one lesson was drawn from the previous crisis, which was the financial crisis. It was not to decouple the social aspect of the crisis from the economic aspect of the crisis. In 2013, the financial crisis was treated as a financial crisis. The socio-economic consequences of the crisis were not clear. They were not even clear to the courts. If you look at the initial case law of the ECJ in Luxembourg, it dismissed some of the human rights aspects of the crisis, if you want, by sending back people and to national courts. I think here the EU has tried to make a coordinated effort to bring together all those policies and mechanisms and try to take at the same time measures that have a multiple impact. They have a fiscal impact, they have an economic impact, no doubt. They have a state aid and competition impact, but they also have an impact on all of us in the European Union and businesses. So I think this is one of the lessons that's been drawn.
Okay. So, I mean, I would like to take Klearchos' feedback on this. I mean, as a UK citizen, of course, you are out of the European Union, but as a Cypriot citizen as well, I mean, to be honest, my personal impression was that the EU was mixed. The response was very late. And my understanding, without having the knowledge that you do in the matter, is that there are no substantial, real measures that as citizens we will benefit from. What's your take?
Well, I have to declare here that I am no relation of Mrs. Kyriakides, who is the Cypriot Health Commissioner. I'm not directly or indirectly responsible for anything that she's done or not done.
Pointed this out, okay.
Pandemic. Well, as Stephanie knows, I belong to the Eurosceptic school of British political thinking. I'm not a Cypriot citizen. I've always been deeply sceptical of the European Union. I've understood and sympathised with the logic behind its existence, which is to prevent Germany from dominating Europe and to keep it under a leash and to ensure that there was no recurrence of either the First or the Second World War. But what we have seen, I have to be brutally frank here, the European Union has failed. The two countries so far which have
you mean generally it failed, but or on this occasion?
The project has failed repeatedly. The Eurozone crisis being one example.
Okay.
The failure to deal with Turkey effectively over the population flows is a second example. But here we have a third. Thousands and thousands of people have died in Italy and in Spain. Now, where the responsibility lies is something that needs to be the subject of both parliamentary investigations and public inquiries, in addition to court investigations. But from what I've seen so far, the European Union has not prevented the catastrophes that have befallen individual EU member states. And Stephanie can help clarify: is that a fault? The fault of the European Union as an institution and its halfway house status of trying to become into an ever closer union and a federalist structure, or is that a problem caused by the willingness of the states to cling on to sovereignty? I mean, that's going to be one of the questions that we'll have to address as time goes by, and lawyers and academics will have to be involved in the I hate to use the phrase, but I will, the post-mortem that must inevitably begin sooner or later. So I would begin at a much bigger level that this is a failure on the part of the European Union. The second thing I'd say with regard to the European Union is that it's now going to face two competing tensions. On the one hand, this pandemic has demonstrated the inadequacies of the United Nations and the World Health Organization, and I would go further, of the European Union at a time when global coordination and global enforcement measures were sorely needed. But on the other hand, and this is the paradox, this whole pandemic is highlighting the value and importance of state sovereignty and national borders. So how to reconcile a closer EU centralized, coordinated approach on the one hand with the protection of national boundaries on the other is a very difficult.
It's a problematic area. It's very problematic, I would say. And Stephanie, I mean, would you agree with me that as soon as this thing broke out, the pandemic, the initial reaction of the EU states was to close the borders, wasn't it?
Yes, yes. The initial reaction, but what people don't know is that that was taken largely, perhaps not, but largely in coordination with other EU states. So the overall picture is that the EU itself took measures so that, you know, the movement of people and goods could be adapted, could be restricted in the view of the pandemic. So a good example is that the EU took immediate action to allow for the movement of what we call necessary workers, such as health workers. So these people can still travel throughout the European Union if need be. There is also legislation regarding health materials and equipment. Again, those materials and equipment can travel within the European Union, and actually they can even travel from outside of the European Union. We know that China is sending assistance, medical assistance to the EU. We also know that there has been debate as to whether the Chinese goods were fit for EU standards. So there has been a rethinking of what the EU standards should be in the current situation. So it's not that the EU sits there and the member states do what they want. There is a coordinated approach. Of course, the obvious analogy, and it's a sad one, in this case of closing the borders, is the migration crisis, which is another case of some member states closing their border without any coordination or very little coordination. And this is an interesting analogy, and case law has started coming in, especially from Luxembourg, as to whether member states were allowed to close their borders, to what extent. And the same thing will happen in the case of COVID-19. So I don't disagree with Klearchos that, you know, there will need to be a post-mortem investigation from the courts, but also from the legislative. In terms of other actions that have been taken, whether they were taken too late or not, well, time will show, because in a crisis there is always that mechanism whereby you try to extinguish the fire, then you build a mechanism to stabilize the situation, then you try to build a mechanism towards the exit and the recovery, and you assess the whole damage. But in terms of other actions that were taken and that are of immediate effect or immediate impact towards citizens.
I mean, the financial assistance,
Yes.
Is there a financial assistance? I mean, what did they decide? I mean,
So
nobody understood, I think.
Yes, financial assistance is extremely complicated. So there are different directions. One direction is the socio-economic measures that we were discussing before, these that were completely absent during the financial crisis. There are some instances of social and economic measures taken on the basis of the principle of solidarity, which is a principle that has been tested and that has been unfortunately underused during the financial crisis. So I think there is a real understanding on the part of EU leaders that this time is the time to show that solidarity means something. Let's not go to the migration crisis. So there is a system put in place which is called SURE under the solidarity mechanism, and there is money poured into this. there are also mechanisms to tweak or to divert fiscal, financial, and economic rules from their usual objectives, so that money can be poured into the forms of funds, guarantee schemes, and other financial assistance towards fighting the COVID-19 disease. There is also just today, just for you to understand, today the Council has adopted a revised version of the 2020 EU budget, deviating all remaining funds to the fight of the COVID-19 virus. Now, we know that the EU budget is not a big one for the reasons that Klearchos identified before, but it is a step. Only today, there was again a Greek scheme, a state aid scheme towards SMEs and businesses in Greece that was approved by the European Commission. This is the second one for Greece that is approved by the European Commission. There has been one for France. Things are moving.
Okay, so
can I just make a comment here?
Yeah, but also if you can answer this, Klearchos, I mean, do you, as a UK citizen, do you feel relieved that you are out of this EU mess now?
I am and I'm not.
No.
I don't normally shower praise on the Cyprus government, but I did at the beginning of the discussion, and I don't normally shower praise on the European Union, but I have to give them credit where credit's due. On the 25th of February, as the epidemic was taking hold in large parts of the world, the European Centre for Disease Prevention and Control issued a technical report. I emphasize the date here, 25th of February 2020. It was called Contact Tracing, Public Health Management of Persons, including healthcare workers, having had contact with COVID-19 cases in the European Union. And this placed great emphasis on two matters. Firstly, identifying symptomatic contacts as early as possible for isolation and treatment, and secondly, facilitating prompt laboratory diagnostic testing. What it also did, and I'm not a doctor here, but I think I can understand what's being said here, it also issued a number of warnings about the dangers of both high-risk exposure and low-risk exposure. One of the examples it gave, I emphasize the date here, 25th of February. One of the examples it gave of high-risk exposure is a person having had direct physical contact with a COVID-19 case, brackets, e.g. shaking hands. So that was on the 25th of February. The British Prime Minister gave a press conference on the 3rd of March. Almost 2 weeks later. You may have seen the film footage on YouTube. If you haven't, I strongly encourage you to do so.
I usually follow Trump these days.
Yeah, you should follow.
Read to you what the Prime Minister and my Prime Minister said, that he had paid a visit to a hospital the other day, and if I can just find the wording for you,
I think I remember the clip.
Hands with everybody that he was encountering, including persons who were suffering from coronavirus, and he added that he would continue to be shaking hands. And our judgment is washing your hands is the crucial thing. Now, that didn't fill me with confidence at the time. I'd stopped shaking hands by then, and I was actually being poked fun of by one or two people when I refused to shake their hands in late February and early March. So I think I've been on the right side of history as far as not shaking hands is concerned. But the serious point, in answer to your question, is, and this is going to have to be one of the things for the inquiries and investigations that will shortly unfold, is firstly, how many member states in the European Union acted upon that guidance issued by the European Centre for Disease Control, both on the 25th of February when it issued that guidance,
not many, I suppose, right?
And a few days later on the 2nd of March when it issued even stronger guidance. And the second question is, why did the United Kingdom not follow that guidance? And was the UK's non-following of that guidance lawful or unlawful? The Cyprus government, again, I'm outside a non-medical expert looking in, appears to have followed that European guidance as regards both contact tracing and isolation of persons with the virus. We hear I think as a so-called hotspot. They seem it's an example of a place where they appear to have been implementing those European Union measures.
Yeah.
So credit must be given where credit is due.
I didn't know this. Yes, you're right. Stefan, in France, what was the response? Did France follow this 25th of February guidance, if you're aware of?
Yes. In France, things were taken very seriously and very early on, I would say.
Okay. I would like to ask you about the Eurobond. There has been this discussion at the Eurogroup about this financial assistance thing and whether it should be a Eurobond or not. So, could you simplify this for our viewers and for myself, actually, because I'm not very good at these financial instruments and all this. My feeling is that no substantial decision was taken at the end of the day, and that it was a European compromise and that nobody understood what's going on.
All right. So in terms of the financial assistance, we said the rules have already been bended, or let's say rendered more flexible. The rules that have to do with all member states of the European Union, not necessarily only the Euro area member states. So the stability, the Growth and Stability Pact, for example, has already been softened. Now, it's true that the Eurogroup a couple of days ago came up with a major announcement where it detailed in simple terms, they thought, the financial assistance. And the word bond may be mentioned, but I think the most worrying aspect of it is probably the likely use of the SME, the ESM, so of the European Stability Mechanism. So I think this is where people started thinking and discussing Eurobonds, because the ESM was brought back into the picture.
This mechanism is a mechanism where states take loans, right?
Yes, this is
Member
a mechanism
states take
which
loans.
lies outside of the European Union, whereby member states seek financial assistance from international lenders.
And they go under a memorandum situation,
and
aren't
they
they?
signed MOUs the way we had one between 2013 and 2016 in Cyprus. So I think this is problematic because DSM has been very much criticized during the financial crisis. It remains, however, that this is the main instrument for financial assistance, longer-term financial assistance.
Okay.
Now, this is normally a mechanism where conditionality is attached. In other words, member states have to sort out their own economies in order to be able to benefit from financial assistance, whether in the form of bonds or something else. Now, what is there to say about COVID-19? How does this fit with COVID-19? I'm not sure I understand what sort of conditionality we could ask the member states to satisfy.
But there is also this escape clause, an escape clause for member states, so that the way I understand it is that there are not such strict rules as far as budgeting and expenses are concerned. But it's not, as you say, it's not very clear what will apply at the end of the day, right?
So this is done. The escape clause has been triggered. It was triggered on the 23rd of March, 2020, under the Stability and Growth Pact, which is the mechanisms that all member states of the European Union are using to coordinate economic policies in the European Union. So the escape clause has been triggered. This will have consequences or implications on the way member states do their budgets. So the so-called European semester. The so-called European semester has been softened already. And of course, there is more responsibility in the hands of Eurozone members.
Okay. So this is clear. I mean, to the extent that European Union can be clear. Klearchos, the UK has officially exited the EU, or is it still bound by EU law?
Well, did the United Kingdom leave the island of Cyprus in 1960?
Well, no.
Yeah, it's very. They're having a 1960 moment.
Okay, it's a nice catchphrase. Yeah.
On the one hand, they managed to release themselves from the iron grip of Brussels and the dominance of Germany within the.
Yes, but I mean that these budgetary things, are they applicable in the UK right now?
I don't know on the specific issue, but what I can tell you is that the United Kingdom exited the European Union, and more specifically its decision-making structures, on the 31st of January at 2300 Greenwich Mean Time. But the departure was subject to a 600-page document called the European Union United Kingdom Withdrawal Agreement, which contains, as I said, 600 pages of legal text, which is binding on both the United Kingdom and the European Union. And therefore, we're in a peculiar situation of being half in and half out. We're outside the decision-making structures, and we have a certain degree of freedom of movement, but we are subject to the terms of that agreement. So, and I wanted to just say one other thing. Approximately 3 to 5% of that 600-page EU-UK withdrawal agreement includes a specific protocol relating to the so-called sovereign base areas. In other words, the remnants of the Cyprus. I'm not an expert on budgetary matters or on the financial aspects of the UK-EU relationship, but what I will say, and I think this is important, especially if you have lawyers among your viewers, that this coronavirus pandemic is going to raise very interesting legal issues, and businesses and individuals are going to require legal advice. For example, I can just give you just a couple of examples. On the basis that large numbers of businesses have suffered huge financial losses, notwithstanding that the support packages that governments have been offered, is there a cause of action against any governments or any individuals over the losses that have been suffered? I'm not talking here about criminal cases. I'm talking here about civil claims, ordinary civil claims for breaches of various duties. Secondly, the people who've lost their lives, and the people who've suffered injuries as a result of the pandemic. Well, in terms of the survivors, do they have any personal injury claims against any authorities in their home country or overseas? The families of those who've sadly died, they may have a cause of action as a result of the premature death of their loved ones. And this is something that lawyers in Cyprus and around the world are going to have to think about, because we're now immersed in this unfolding pandemic. The priority is to save life and to support businesses as they go, and support individual clients as they go through the day-to-day problems that they have. But sooner or later, the lawyers are going to have to start advising clients, if they haven't already done so, and they have already started in the United States, if you follow some of the US litigation that's already commenced. The question has to arise as to which remedies are available to those who have suffered, either through their own health or through their own financial losses.
This is where, if I may say, this is where the use of an instrument like the European Stability Mechanism is very worrying, because that instrument, that mechanism is a mechanism that lies outside of the EU law remit, if you want. So it's a mechanism which is an international law mechanism, and it offers no or very little remedy to people who are directly affected by the current crisis, the way it didn't offer remedy to people who were affected by the financial crisis, such as bondholders or depositors. So this is where it's very worrying, because if you refer to the initial case law of the Luxembourg court on the financial crisis, which is the very famous or infamous Pringle case, which somehow justified or gave legitimacy to the ESM, there is a whole part of the judgment that deals with remedying the situation of individuals, whereby the ECJ actually very clearly said in that judgment that, well, the EU Charter does not apply in this case. And this is where I think that using the ESM, especially in the context of COVID-19, is a problem, It is a problem because of conditionality. It is a problem because it doesn't allow for remedying the situation of individuals who've been affected. And I would suggest that there are other mechanisms. The European Central Bank, by the way, last week came up, sorry, not last week, on the 18th of March, came up with a program which is called the Pandemic Emergency Purchase Program.
Which is that the European Central Bank?
Yeah, the ECB. The ECB in Frankfurt. So it basically, it is a mechanism to support liquidity and financing conditions, widening the range of assets that can be used for credit, for corporate credit, and ease collateral standards. So, I mean, in my view, those are the avenues that are probably more worth exploring: monetary policy, fiscal policy, economic policy, although then they can be perceived, as you said, as being drops in the ocean.
Yeah, I mean, this is what a lot of people think, and I don't know what is the situation in the UK, because from reading some online UK newspapers, Klearchos, I see that there is no discussion about Europe these days in the British press. I mean, they're preoccupied with what's going on internally, and I mean, is it did the UK exited the EU once and for all? You think? I mean, they won't look back.
You've raised a very interesting question. I was reading Thucydides and his history of the Peloponnesian Wars, and the plague that gripped Athens took place at the time when the Spartans launched their attack on Attica. And one of the themes that seems to be emerging from the history of the Peloponnesian War is that if the pandemics or plagues thrive on governments being preoccupied with other things. And in the case of the Peloponnesian Wars, both the Spartans and the Athenians were preoccupied with warfare rather than protecting the health of their own citizens. And the timeline, again, is very important. Lawyers and historians operate with timelines.
Yeah.
And I've been doing a timeline. If you look at the history, the Lancet magazine issued warnings about the then COVID, whatever it was called back then, CV-19, I think it was, on the 24th of January. The World Health Organization declared a public health emergency of global scale, or words to that effect, on the 30th of January. And on the 31st of January, the United Kingdom exited the European Union. On the same day, in other words, on the 31st of January, Brexit Day, the first confirmed cases of coronavirus were announced in both Italy and the United Kingdom. Now, in hindsight, which was the more important development, Brexit or the emergence of coronavirus in the United Kingdom? Yes. Well, as far as the Prime Minister was concerned, it was Brexit. He gave a televised statement on the 31st of January. Yeah. He was focused exclusively on Brexit and the opportunities presented by Brexit. He said nothing about the coronavirus. And indeed, on the 3rd of February, if I can just make one final point here with the timeline, and if anyone's interested, they can read my articles in Simerini few weeks where I go into this in detail. I'll try and
I will put the links in the on the website when I publish this episode, so they will be able to see the links there. Very interesting, to be honest.
The point I was just going to just to close the timeline issue is on the 3rd of February, 3 days after Brexit, the Prime Minister gave a speech on international trade in Greenwich, and he referred implicitly to the warnings about coronavirus as autarkic rhetoric. In fact, he used the phrase bizarre autarkic rhetoric. Boris Johnson studied ancient Greek at school and university. Like me, he likes English words of Greek origin. So he used the phrase autarkic rhetoric. And of course, that again illustrates that his mindset at the time was focused on trade, not public health. So to go back to your original question, one of the aggravating features of this whole disaster is that, or one of the distinguishing features of this disaster is that at a critical moment in late January and February 2020, the mindset of the British Prime Minister was fixated on Brexit rather than the emerging pandemic. And again, it's too early to reach any firm conclusions, but when we do have the parliamentary investigations and the official public inquiry, which I hope will be created sooner or later, and any forthcoming court cases, the full scale of that coincidence or parallel development will be explored. And I encourage everybody to read or reread The Peloponnesian Wars by Thukydides, where he goes into great detail on Athenian plague. One of the other things he says, which really moved me, was that the first people to suffer when the plague struck Athens were the doctors, because they were the ones who were treating the patients. And we're seeing a regrettable parallel across
this is what is happening now
across the world.
Absolutely.
The first people to suffer are the doctors and nurses, and not only them, the other healthcare workers, the chefs, the cleaning staff, anybody who is involved in a hospital environment. And I pay tribute to them, but they are regrettably at risk. And Thucydides sends us those warnings through history, as do some of the other ancient Greeks.
And this brings me to the final subject that I want to discuss about this rule of law initiative. Stephanie, would you like to tell us a little bit the idea behind this and what this actually is and how we can all participate? I mean, as lawyers or academics in this platform, I understand.
Yes, thank you for asking. So it comes from basically a willingness from us to participate to the wider debate, to try to enrich and enhance the wider debate, but within the framework of the rule of law. So the idea is not to focus so much or only on the day-to-day difficulties or the day-to-day analysis, because this is factual, and this is, facts and data change every day. So our idea is to focus on more basic fundamental principles that are embedded into the rule of law. So this is based on previous and current expertise we have at the school among the academics. We have a long history of expertise in crisis mechanisms and looking at different dimensions of the crisis, various crises, the EU level, the international level, the national level. So we wanted to use that expertise to try to take it further. There is actually a willingness on the part of the European Union. Not only that, there is an announcement of the 31st of March 2020 from the President of the European Commission saying, or warning rather, member states that measures taken by member states in the context of emergency, COVID-19 emergency, will be scrutinized at the EU level. And there has been a response. There has been a coordinated response by about 10 member states, which can be found on the internet, which reassures all of us as to their commitment to the rule of law in times of crisis. We as academics, however, and as lawyers, have noticed the many difficulties, the practical difficulties of upholding the rule of law in times of crisis. And we are offering a forum, an open forum, to anyone, whether it's lawyers, whether it's academics, whether it's students, who would like to participate in that forum, to try to tackle the rule of law from various principles, like Klearchos just did it now, or various perspectives, like we just did it now. So if you could circulate the link to the initiative.
Yeah, but will you hold any seminars, any discussions, or write any papers on this? Because to be honest, the lawyers in my profession and what we have been discussing the last few weeks is the rule of law, is the fact that the courts are closed.
Yes.
This relates to the administration of justice.
Yes.
Human rights, again, it's a rule of law aspect. Yes, Klearchos.
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you for asking us that question. Again, if those of us steeped in common law will remember the wise words of Lord Atkin in his dissenting speech in Liversidge and Anderson: amid the clash of arms, the laws are not silent. That principle was later upheld as correct in the Rossminster case by the House of Lords in 1990. So amid the clash of arms, the laws are not silent. Of course, we're not facing a clash of arms at the moment, but what we are seeing is a public health emergency. And
well, our president said that we are at war, and many other politicians use this phrase actually.
Well, on that basis, then we as members of the legal profession, I'm a non-practicing lawyer these days, we as members of the legal profession and as academic lawyers have a moral duty to keep an eye out for what governments and private bodies are doing, because amid this clash, opportunities exist for those in positions of power to abuse their power, to breach the law, and to undermine the individual freedoms and protections of citizens and of businesses and of everybody else in our society. Now, there's a limit to what we can do, but what we're trying to do is provide a platform, an online platform, to enable written contributions to be submitted in the form of essays or articles, which will go through a light touch process of peer review to ensure quality control. What we would also like to do is engage in discussions such as the one that we're having. I want to just say one other thing that's very, very important. I have full respect for the members of the medical and the scientific professions who are leading the struggle against coronavirus, but they have tended to dominate the public discourse, and the lawyers and the legal academics have tended to be eclipsed. So this is an attempt to try and remind everybody that we do live in a democratic society. We may have the Turkish occupation in the occupied north. We may be surrounded by failed states or failing states and a lack of respect for the law. But as the Republic of Cyprus is in the European Union and the Council of Europe and the United Nations and the Commonwealth, 4 organizations that cherish and uphold on paper the rule of law, we as members of the legal profession and the legal academic community have a duty to actually promote the rule of law through the best mechanism available to us, which is the spoken word through our mouths that we can still exercise as free citizens, and through the written word, which is now these days normally transmitted electronically through the internet. So I encourage everybody who's listening, whether they're a member of the legal profession, a legal academic, or an ordinary citizen, to find our website, which you will circulate.
I have the link, and it will be on this video and on the page.
And we encourage anybody who wants to submit anything in writing, whether to raise a concern or to highlight an issue, to do so. It's essential that as this crisis unfolds and as we emerge from the crisis, because we are going to have a post-crisis phase, that we keep a lookout for the rule of law. I just want to say one other last thing in this. Again, if you go back to Thucydides, the plague was in 2 phases. It started off in the spring, it subsided in the summer, and it came back with a vengeance in the autumn and winter. A similar pattern emerged in the influenza pandemic of 1918. It went 3 phases to the influenza pandemic of 1918 to 1919. So there needs to be the public health professionals, the medical profession, the nursing profession. They need to do what they're doing and contribute to the public discourse. But equally, the legal side of the professional sphere needs to likewise be active in the public space.
Stephanie?
I just wanted to add that we actually do a similar exercise also at the European level and international level. So through networks of academics, we participate to similar initiatives, and we highlight emergency measures taken in Cyprus that affect the rule of law. We are being asked by various colleagues. So this is a building block exercise, a coordination exercise towards consolidation. So the more people participate, the wider view we have. We may have, surveys to also circulate to people. We have received questionnaires already in terms of the impact of COVID-19 on the rule of law, or on the judiciary or the legal system. So it may mean that, there are more activities coming in, and there will be webinars, yes.
Yeah, and I don't know if other institutions can join on it, or even government agencies or government departments can join this discussion, and whether a seminar or a conference can be organized after this thing is over. But what I would like to highlight exactly is this crucial contribution of the academic community, because 10 years ago, we wouldn't have this possibility. I mean, to organize this blog, to discuss the rule of law, discuss human rights. I started my career as a lawyer in 1996. And at the time, there was no internet, there was no universities, there was no other law school. I mean, we graduated from the UK or from Greece. And there was virtually no discussion or criticism about court cases, about the system. And one of the reasons that we have these problems nowadays is because there was no criticism in the last 2 decades. So I would like to take this opportunity and congratulate you and other academics, other institutions that we have websites now, we have podcasts, we have this discussion, which I find very useful for the development of the community and of the legal profession and of the legal culture in the island. And this is another area that I think we have a problem. Criticizing judgments. The judges may have a problem. I mean, they don't like it when you criticize, when you say something is wrong or it should be the other way around. So yes, I mean, I would certainly participate in this and in any way I can, and I will encourage others because the subject is to the point. I mean, this is what we should be discussing after this pandemic is over, is the rule of law and whether the human rights were protected, whether the administration of justice was proceeded in the right way or not, and so forth. We draw example.
If I may, Christophoros, I don't think that if the argumentation is well articulated and is elevated at a level that is beyond factual analysis, I don't think that any judge would have a problem with this. So it is what you said, is the need to elevate the legal culture here to an educational level which is satisfactory to be able to constructively discuss and involve all stakeholders, not only lawyers but also the judges.
Can I just make a very important point here? That the I encourage the legal profession, and what you're doing is a great example. You're contributing to the public discourse and to public education. This is what members of the legal profession should be doing. They should devote a fraction of their working week to a public service and public education of one form or another, because we are all collectively and individually the foot soldiers of the rule of law, and we need to ensure that its principles are understood and promoted and protected. And what I wanted to really emphasize in this context is that we adopt, at least in my school and my university, a non-party political approach. I happen to like criticizing governments when governments need to be criticized, but at the same time, as I've tried to do today, I've tried to be fair and give credit where credit is due. That is really the function of the academic. They have to be fair in their criticism and critical analysis, and not be tarred with any party political affiliation. But equally, an academic is welcome to be a member of a political party, but they should declare their party political affiliation when they're engaging in the public discourse. What we've tried to do through I'll give you the website. It's lawblog.uclancyprus.ac.ucy.
I will put it up in the video and also in the notes.
Thank you. Lawblog.uclancyprus.ac.cy. What we've tried to do is provide a non-party political platform, because a lot of what happens in Cyprus is driven by party political agendas or cliques, networks, which have their own agendas to pursue, and this is very much driven by a dedication to the rule of law. And what is the rule of law? Ultimately, it's a dedication to the principles of humanity and justice and democracy, which are the characteristics, and equality before the law, and equal justice before the law, which are the abiding characteristics of any civilized society. And so thank you for giving us the opportunity to spend a few minutes of this discussion on our new initiative.
And I hope that we will be able to repeat this and discuss other issues, or perhaps with other colleagues at the university. Thank you so much. It's been 75 minutes. It's very meaningful discussion. I enjoyed it very much. I wish you happy Easter with your families and friends. Say hello to my friend, Professor Shaelou. Klearchos μου, καλό Πάσχα, καλές γιορτές. And I hope we meet soon in person this time.
I do.
Take care.
You.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure taking part.